The execution platform gleamed under the harsh artificial suns of Xerion Prime, the crown jewel of the Galactic Empire. Thousands of alien spectators filled the crystalline amphitheater, their various forms creating a sea of colors and shapes that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Today, however, the atmosphere was electric with bloodlust and imperial pride. Admiral Vexitar adjusted his ceremonial armor, the purple and gold insignia of the Empire catching the light as he stepped forward to address the crowd. His forearms spread wide in a gesture of dominance, while his reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. Citizens of the Empire. His voice boomed through the translation devices embedded throughout the stadium. Today we demonstrate the price of defiance. Today we show what happens to those who dare challenge our absolute authority. The crowd erupted in cheers, a cacophony of alien voices that rose to the artificial sky. In the holding cells beneath the platform, Marcus Chen pressed his face against the energy barrier that contained him. At 15 years old, he should have been worried about school tests and teenage crushes, not staring death in the face on an alien world, billions of light years from Earth. Marcus had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. His family had been among the first human colonists to settle on the frontier world of Haven's Rest, part of humanity's expansion into the galaxy under the Empire's supposedly benevolent guidance. When the local imperial governor had decided to impose crushing taxes on the human settlements, Marcus's mother had organized peaceful protests. She had believed in the Empire's own laws about fair treatment of member species. She had been naive. The protest had been labeled as rebellion. Imperial forces had swept through Haven's Rest like a plague, arresting anyone connected to the demonstrations. Marcus's parents had hidden him in the family's storm shelter, but Imperial scanners had found him anyway. His parents had been executed on the spot. Marcus had been brought here to Xerion Prime to serve as an example to any other humans who might consider resistance. Now, as the guards approached his cell, Marcus thought about his father. Not the man who had raised him on Haven's Rest, but his biological father, whom he had never known. His mother had only told him stories, dark stories that she claimed were just fantasy, tales of a man who had once been the most feared assassin in known space. A man who had retired when he fell in love with her, who had disappeared completely from the galactic underworld to live a quiet life as a farmer, a man called Baba Yaga. The energy barrier dissolved, and Imperial guards in powered armor hauled Marcus to his feet. Their touch was rough, unnecessary given his restraints, but cruelty was a feature of the Empire, not a bug. As they dragged him toward the lift that would take him to the execution platform, Marcus caught a glimpse of himself in the polished metal walls. He looked ordinary, brown hair, brown eyes, average height for his age. Nothing about him suggested he was anything more than a human teenager from a backwater colony. The guards saw him the same way, just another piece of propaganda in the Empire's endless campaign to maintain order through fear. The lift rose smoothly, carrying Marcus toward his death. Through the transparent walls, he could see the city of Xerion Prime spreading out in all directions, towering spires of alien architecture, flying vehicles weaving between buildings like metallic insects, and everywhere the purple banners of the Empire. It was beautiful and terrible, a monument to the Empire's power built on the subjugation of 1,000 species. The lift stopped, and the doors opened to reveal the execution platform. The noise of the crowd hit Marcus like a physical blow, tens of thousands of aliens cheering for his death. Some threw things at the platform, though energy shields deflected the projectiles. Others held signs in various alien scripts that the translation system rendered as calls for human extinction. Admiral Vexitar stood at a podium near the center of the platform, his presence commanding even among the chaos. Behind him, a massive holographic display showed images from the rebellion on Haven's Rest. Doctored footage that made the peaceful protests look like violent riots, complete with fabricated scenes of humans attacking Imperial personnel. Behold, Vextar's voice cut through the noise, the face of human treachery. This whelp's family dared to challenge Imperial authority. They believed their primitive emotions were more important than our galactic order. Today we correct their mistake. Marcus was forced to his knees on the platform, the restraints making any movement impossible. Around his neck, the guards fitted a neural disruptor, a device that would ensure his death was both painful and slow. broadcast live across the Empire as a warning to any other species considering resistance. The Admiral activated a holographic interface, and Marcus could see countdown timers appearing throughout the stadium. 5 minutes until execution. The crowd's excitement reached fever pitch, and some aliens were literally vibrating with anticipation. But as Marcus knelt there waiting for death, he thought about the stories his mother had told him. Stories of a man who had once walked through imperial strongholds like Death Incarnate, who had brought down crime lords and corrupt officials with nothing but his skills and his will. Stories of someone who had killed his way through an entire army to rescue a single person he cared about. Stories of his father. The countdown reached 4 minutes, and Admiral Vextar began reading the formal charges against Marcus and his family. Sedition, rebellion, conspiracy against imperial authority. The words washed over Marcus like meaningless noise, because he was remembering something else his mother had told him. "Your father loved us enough to disappear completely," she had said. "But if anything ever happened to us, if we ever needed him, he would find a way to know. And he would come." Marcus had thought it was just wishful thinking, the fantasy of a woman trying to comfort her child. But now, with death approaching, he found himself hoping she had been right. Hoping that somewhere in the galaxy, a retired assassin would feel the pull of vengeance calling him back to his old life. 3 minutes on the countdown. In the depths of space, on a small freighter light years away, a man named Ivan Volkov suddenly stopped what he was doing. He had been checking cargo manifests, living the quiet life of an independent trader that he had maintained for 16 years. But something had changed. A feeling he hadn't experienced since he had abandoned his old identity crept through his chest like ice water. Something was wrong with his family. Ivan Volkov's hands trembled as he activated the quantum communication array hidden in his freighter's secondary cargo hold. For 16 years, he had resisted the urge to check on Elena and their son. The galaxy was safer when Baba Yaga remained dead, when Ivan Volkov was just another trader moving goods between systems. But the feeling in his chest had grown stronger with each passing hour. A premonition that had saved his life countless times during his years as the Empire's most wanted assassin. The holographic interface flickered to life, connecting to a network of informants and contacts that Ivan had maintained despite his retirement. Most of them thought he was dead. Those who knew better had never dared to contact him. But information was a currency that never lost its value, and Ivan had invested heavily in it over the years. The first few data streams showed nothing unusual. Trade reports, political developments, imperial propaganda broadcasts. Then Ivan's blood turned cold as he found what he was looking for. Haven's Rest colony had been pacified following a terrorist uprising. Official imperial records listed Elena Chen as executed for sedition, along with dozens of other colonists. But it was the supplementary report that made Ivan's world stop spinning. One survivor had been transported to Zerion Prime for public execution, as an example to other potential rebels. A 15-year-old boy named Marcus Chen. Ivan's vision blurred, as rage flooded through him like molten metal. Elena was dead. His son, the boy he had never been able to acknowledge, never been able to hold, was about to be murdered for the entertainment of imperial citizens. The life he had built, the peace he had found, crumbled around him like ancient stone. He accessed the Imperial Broadcast Network, hacking through layers of security with skills that muscle memory had preserved perfectly, despite 16 years of disuse. The live feed from Zerion Prime appeared on his screen, showing the execution platform where his son knelt in restraints. 2 minutes on the countdown. Ivan studied every detail of the platform, the surrounding structures, the security arrangements. His mind automatically cataloged weak points, exit routes, the positions of guards and their equipment. It was like slipping on a familiar coat, the cold, calculating mindset of Baba Yaga settling over him with terrifying ease. But even as his tactical mind worked, Ivan knew the truth. He was light years away from Zerion Prime. No ship could cover that distance in time. Even if he left immediately, even if he pushed his engines beyond their safety limits, Marcus would be dead long before Ivan could reach him. 1 minute on the countdown. That was when Ivan noticed something in the background of the broadcast. A maintenance worker moving between the support structures beneath the platform, checking systems that kept the massive amphitheater running. The worker moved with efficient precision, ignored by the guards because he was just part of the infrastructure. Ivan enhanced the image, zooming in on the worker's face. What he saw there made him laugh, a sound like breaking glass in the silence of his ship. The maintenance worker was Dmitry Kozlov, Ivan's former partner and the only other person in the galaxy who had ever been called Baba Yaga. 40 seconds on the countdown. On Zerion Prime, Marcus watched the timer approach zero with surprising calm. He had made peace with his death, but he had also made a promise to himself. If he was going to die as an example, he would die with dignity. He would not give the Empire the satisfaction of seeing him break. Admiral Vextar raised his ceremonial blade, a weapon that would activate the neural disruptor and begin Marcus's prolonged death. The crowd fell silent in anticipation. Thousands of alien eyes focused on the platform. Let this serve as a warning to all who would challenge the Empire, Vextar declared. We are eternal. We are inevitable. We are— 20 seconds, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but the damage was done. In that brief moment of darkness, something had changed on the platform. Admiral Vextar looked around in confusion, his forearms reaching for weapons that were no longer there. The guards who had been surrounding Marcus were on the ground, their armor smoking from neural stunner hits, and standing behind Marcus, cutting through his restraints with a maintenance tool that was definitely not standard equipment, was a figure in a worker's coveralls. "Hello, boy," Dmitry Kozlov said quietly, his voice barely audible over the confused shouting of the crowd. "Your father sends his regards." Marcus stared at the man who had just saved his life. Dmitry was older than Marcus had expected from his mother's stories, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent in dark places. But there was something in those eyes, a hardness that reminded Marcus of his mother's descriptions of Baba Yaga. "You knew my father?" Marcus whispered as Dmitry finished cutting his restraints. "I was your father," Dmitry replied with a grim smile. "Just not in the way you think. Now can you run?" The crowd was starting to realize something was wrong. Admiral Vextar was shouting orders at guards who were slow to respond, their training not having prepared them for this situation. Security forces throughout the amphitheater were mobilizing, but they were looking for external threats, not for problems already inside their perimeter. Marcus nodded, feeling circulation return to his arms and legs as the restraints fell away. "Where are we going?" "Away from here," Dmitry said, pulling Marcus toward a maintenance hatch that had been concealed beneath the platform. "Your father has a ship waiting, but we need to reach it first." They dropped through the hatch into the service tunnels beneath the amphitheater. The space was narrow and filled with pipes and conduits that carried power and data throughout the facility. Dmitry moved through the maze with the confidence of someone who had studied the blueprints extensively. While Marcus struggled to keep up, behind them, alarms began to wail as the Empire finally realized what had happened. The execution of a human terrorist had been interrupted by an unknown agent, broadcast live across the galaxy. It was the kind of humiliation that the Empire could not tolerate, the kind of event that would have consequences far beyond one boy's life. "How long have you been planning this?" Marcus asked as they crawled through a particularly narrow section of tunnel. "About 6 hours, Dmitry replied. "Your father contacted me when he learned what had happened. We had about 4 hours to get into position and 2 hours to plan the extraction. Not our best work, but it will have to do. 6 hours. Marcus thought about that as they moved through the tunnels. 6 hours ago, he had been resigned to death, believing himself abandoned in a hostile galaxy. 6 hours ago, his father had learned of his existence and his danger, and had immediately set in motion a rescue operation that spanned light years. They reached a vertical shaft that led up to street level. Dmitry produced a grappling device from his coveralls and fired it upward, the line catching on something above them. "Can you climb?" he asked. Marcus nodded, though his arms were still weak from the restraints. Dmitry went first, hauling himself up the line with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. Marcus followed, his muscles screaming in protest but his determination unwavering. They emerged through a disguised access panel into an alley between two massive buildings. The street beyond was chaos, Imperial forces responding to the alert, civilian traffic being diverted, the entire city shifting into lockdown mode. But in the alley they were invisible. "This way," Dmitry said, leading Marcus toward a ground vehicle parked at the mouth of the alley. "Your father is waiting at the spaceport. Once we reach him, we can leave this place behind forever." As they walked toward the vehicle, Marcus felt something he had not experienced since his mother's death. Hope. Somewhere in the galaxy was a man who had loved him enough to risk everything for his rescue. A man whose legend was about to begin again, written in Imperial blood. The ground vehicle hummed through the streets of Zerion Prime's industrial district, while Imperial forces locked down the government sector behind them. Dmitri drove with casual expertise, taking turns that seemed random, but were actually following a route he had memorized hours earlier. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, watching his rescuer with fascination. "Tell me about my father," Marcus said as they waited at a checkpoint where Imperial guards were inspecting civilian vehicles. Dmitri kept his eyes on the road ahead, but Marcus could see something change in his expression. "What did your mother tell you?" "That he was called Baba Yaga, that he disappeared when they fell in love, that he would come if we ever needed him." "She told you the truth," Dmitri said quietly, "though perhaps not all of it. Baba Yaga was not just one man, boy. It was a partnership. Ivan and I worked together for 15 years, taking contracts that no one else would touch. We were the galaxy's solution to problems that could not be solved through legal channels." The checkpoint guard approached their vehicle, his scanner already active. Dmitri handed over identification documents that identified him as a maintenance supervisor for the amphitheater's technical systems. The guard barely glanced at them before waving the vehicle through. 15 years, Marcus repeated as they drove away from the checkpoint. "What kind of problems?" Dmitri was quiet for a moment, navigating through a maze of cargo haulers and industrial traffic. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of old memories. Corrupt governors who sold their people into slavery, crime lords who trafficked children across species lines, military commanders who committed genocide for profit. The Empire called us terrorists, but we only killed those who deserved killing. We were justice in a galaxy that had forgotten what the word meant. Marcus thought about that as they turned onto a main thoroughfare, leading toward the spaceport. Around them, the city continued its normal functions despite the chaos in the government sector. Millions of beings going about their daily lives, most of them unaware that the Empire's most wanted assassins had just resurfaced after 16 years of silence. "Why did you stop?" Marcus asked. "Your father fell in love," Dmitri said simply. Elena was investigating Imperial corruption on a mining world called Kepler-7. She was a journalist then, young and idealistic and convinced she could change the galaxy with nothing but truth and determination. Ivan was supposed to eliminate her because her stories were threatening some very powerful people. Instead of continuing the story, Dmitri turned onto a side road that led toward a smaller section of the spaceport reserved for private vessels. Here the security was lighter, focused more on customs violations than political threats. "What happened?" Marcus prompted. Ivan took one look at her and decided that maybe truth and determination were worth protecting after all. He killed her targets instead of her, and then he helped her expose the corruption network. When the dust settled, she had won a Galactic journalism prize, and he had a price on his head that made our old bounties look like pocket change. They passed through the spaceport's outer perimeter, Dimitri's credentials getting them past security barriers with minimal scrutiny. The maintenance supervisor identity was perfect cover, invisible and unremarkable, the kind of person security guards saw dozens of times each day without really noticing. "So he retired to protect her," Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn. "We both did," Dmitri corrected. "I had found someone too, though it did not work out as well as Ivan's romance. We disappeared completely, created new identities, scattered to different parts of the galaxy. We agreed never to contact each other unless the galaxy was ending or one of us was dying." The spaceport's landing bays stretched out before them, hundreds of ships of various sizes and configurations. Dmitri drove past passenger liners and cargo haulers, heading toward the section reserved for smaller private vessels. Marcus could see increased Imperial patrol activity around the larger ships, but the smaller bays seemed relatively quiet. "Then how did he contact you?" Marcus asked. Dmitri smiled grimly. "Emergency code we established 16 years ago. A message that could only mean one thing. Baba Yaga rides again." They stopped beside Landing Bay 77 Alpha, where a sleek ship waited with its engines already warming. The vessel was smaller than Marcus had expected. designed for speed rather than cargo capacity. Its hull was unmarked except for a registration number that was probably as fake as Dimitri's identification documents. "Is that his ship?" Marcus asked. "One of them," Dimitri replied, getting out of the vehicle. "Your father was always paranoid about escape routes. He has ships, weapons caches, and safe houses scattered across the galaxy. Most of them are probably still active." They approached the ship's boarding ramp, which lowered as they got close. Marcus felt his heart racing as he prepared to meet the man whose legend had shaped his childhood imagination. The father who had sacrificed everything to give him a normal life, only to risk everything again to save him. The figure who emerged from the ship was not what Marcus had expected. Ivan Volkov was shorter than the stories had suggested, with graying hair and the kind of face that could disappear in a crowd without effort. He wore simple trader's clothing and moved with economy rather than menace. If Marcus had passed him on the street, he would never have suspected this was one of the most dangerous men in galactic history. But when Ivan's eyes met Marcus's, there was no mistaking the connection between them. Those were his mother's eyes looking back at him, filled with love and loss and 16 years of separation. "Hello, son," Ivan said quietly. Marcus felt tears he had been holding back since his mother's death finally break free. This man had given up everything to protect him, had lived as a stranger for 16 years to keep him safe. And when that safety had been shattered, he had emerged from retirement to save him. "Hello, father," Marcus managed to say. Ivan stepped forward and embraced him, and for a moment the galaxy seemed less hostile and cold. In his father's arms, Marcus felt something he had not experienced since before the Imperial raids: security. "I'm sorry I was not there sooner," Ivan said. "I am sorry about your mother. She was the best of us, and she deserved better than what this galaxy gave her. She told me stories about you," Marcus said. "About Baba Yaga, I thought they were just fantasy." Ivan's expression darkened. "They were not fantasy, but they were supposed to be history. The Empire forced them to become current events again." Dimitri approached, carrying equipment bags from the ground vehicle. "We need to leave soon. Imperial response teams will expand their search perimeter, and this spaceport will not stay quiet for long." Ivan nodded, leading Marcus up the boarding ramp into the ship. The interior was spartanly furnished but efficient, with everything needed for extended space travel. Marcus could see weapon lockers built into the walls along with sophisticated communication and navigation equipment. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked as Ivan began pre-flight preparations. "Away from here first," Ivan replied, his fingers dancing over control panels with practiced ease. "Then we have decisions to make. The Empire believes Baba Yaga is active again. They will mobilize resources to hunt us that they have not used in 16 years. We can run, or we can remind them why they feared that name in the first place." The ship's engines reached full power, and Marcus felt the deck vibrate beneath his feet. Through the viewport, he could see Imperial security forces beginning to coordinate their search efforts, expanding outward from the amphitheater like ripples in a pond. "What do you think we should do?" Marcus asked. Ivan looked at his son with eyes that held the accumulated weight of a lifetime spent in shadow and violence. "I think the Empire made a mistake when they killed your mother. I think they made an even bigger mistake when they tried to kill you. And I think it is time they remembered what happens when someone hurts Baba Yaga's family." The ship lifted off from the landing bay, rising through Zerion Prime's atmosphere toward the stars beyond. Behind them, alarms wailed and search teams scrambled to respond to a threat they did not yet understand. Ahead lay the vast galaxy where legends were about to be reborn in fire and blood. 3 weeks after the escape from Zerion Prime, the galaxy had begun to remember why the name Baba Yaga had once been whispered in fear across 1,000 worlds. Ivan's ship drifted silently through the asteroid field of the Corvus system, its stealth systems making it effectively invisible to Imperial sensors. Inside the cramped but efficient vessel, father and son studied holographic displays showing Imperial fleet movements throughout the sector. "They are pulling ships from patrol routes," Marcus observed, pointing to the tactical display. "Concentrating forces around major Imperial installations." Ivan nodded approvingly. His son had a natural aptitude for strategy that reminded him strongly of Elena. "Good eye. They are preparing for a siege mentality, protecting their most valuable assets. What does that tell you about their assessment of the threat?" Marcus considered the question while Dimitri worked at a nearby station, maintaining the weapons and equipment they had been gathering over the past 3 weeks. Their ship now carried enough firepower to level a small city, along with surveillance gear that could penetrate most Imperial security systems. They think we are planning something big, Marcus said finally. Something that would target their infrastructure rather than just random attacks. Exactly, Ivan replied. Which means they still remember how we used to operate. They expect strategic strikes, not terrorist bombings. They expect Baba Yaga to have a plan. The past 3 weeks had been a revelation for Marcus. His father and Dmitri had not emerged from retirement unchanged. If anything, 16 years of planning and preparation had made them more dangerous than they had ever been. They moved through the galaxy like ghosts, striking at Imperial facilities with surgical precision before vanishing again into the void. Their first target had been the detention facility on Malachar Prime, where 23 human colonists from Haven's Rest were being held for interrogation. Ivan and Dmitri had infiltrated the facility during a shift change, eliminated the guards with silent efficiency, and extracted all 23 prisoners without triggering a single alarm. The prisoners had been delivered to a safe world beyond Imperial reach, while the facility's computer systems had been loaded with a virus that would slowly corrupt Imperial intelligence databases throughout the sector. Their second strike had been more personal. Governor Zelnoth, who had ordered the massacre on Haven's Rest, had been found dead in his private chambers on the luxury world of Paradiso Station. Imperial investigators had discovered no signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle, and no witnesses. Zelnoth had simply died in his sleep, victim of a poison so sophisticated that it left no trace in his system. The only clue had been a small flower placed on his pillow, a forget-me-not from Earth, Elena's favorite bloom. The third attack had targeted the Imperial Naval Depot at Rigel 7, where the fleet that had bombarded Haven's Rest was undergoing refit and resupply. Dmitri had infiltrated the facility as a maintenance worker, while Ivan had hacked the depot's defense systems from orbit. When the sabotage was complete, 6 Imperial destroyers had suffered catastrophic engine failures that would keep them in dry dock for months. No Imperial personnel had been killed, but the message was clear. Baba Yaga could reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. The response patterns are interesting, Dmitri commented from his workstation. They are not just defending, they are preparing for a counterattack. Look at these fleet repositions. Ivan studied the new data Dmitri had highlighted. Strike groups moving into offensive formations. They think they can draw us out by threatening civilian targets. Marcus felt cold anger settling in his chest. They would kill innocent people just to get to us. They killed innocent people on Haven's Rest just to maintain order, Ivan replied grimly. The Empire does not distinguish between combatants and civilians when it comes to maintaining power. That is why we must be very careful about our next move. The holographic display shifted to show detailed intelligence on their primary target. Admiral Vextar, the architect of the Haven's Rest massacre, and the man who had nearly executed Marcus on live Galactic broadcast. Intelligence gathered from their previous operations had revealed that Vextar was coordinating the Empire's response to the Baba Yaga threat from his flagship, the Imperial Dreadnought Dominion. The Dominion was a kilometer-long monster of Imperial engineering, armed with enough firepower to crack planets and protected by shields that could shrug off direct hits from capital ship weapons. It traveled with an escort fleet of 8 destroyers and 4 heavy cruisers, making it effectively a mobile fortress. Under normal circumstances, even thinking about attacking such a target would be suicide. But Ivan and Dmitri had not survived 15 years as the galaxy's most wanted assassins by accepting normal circumstances. The Dominion will be in the Kepler system. Tomorrow, Ivan said, manipulating the display to show projected fleet movements. Vextar is planning to use the abandoned mining colonies there as bait, hoping we will try to rescue the civilian population they are planning to relocate there. Relocate? Marcus asked. Concentration camps, Dmitri clarified bluntly. They will move human colonists from a dozen worlds to Kepler 7, then publicize the relocations widely. When we show up to rescue them, the Dominion will be waiting. Marcus studied the tactical situation, his mind working through the same analytical processes his father had been teaching him. It is a trap, but it could also be an opportunity. They expect us to come for the civilians, but they do not expect us to come for Vextar himself. Ivan smiled at his son's reasoning. What are you thinking? The Dominion has to lower its shields to launch shuttles for the relocation operation. Marcus said, highlighting critical points on the display. And Vextar will want to oversee the operation personally. His psychological profile suggests he needs to be in control of situations that matter to him. Go on, Ivan encouraged. So he will be on the surface, probably at the main processing facility they will set up. If we can get close enough during the shield window, we could extract him from the planet before his security detail realizes what is happening. Dmitri looked up from his work with an expression of professional admiration. Extract him to where? The moment we grab him, every ship in the fleet will be hunting us. Marcus's smile was cold enough to make both older men proud. Extract him to right here, to this asteroid field, where we have spent 3 weeks setting up a very special welcoming committee. Ivan and Dmitri exchanged glances, and Marcus could see them communicating in the wordless way of old partners. They were evaluating his plan, looking for flaws and complications, but also recognizing the elegant simplicity of it. It could work, Ivan said finally, but it would require perfect timing and considerable luck. If any part of the operation goes wrong, we will be trapped between an Imperial fleet and planetary defenses with no escape route. Then we make sure nothing goes wrong, Marcus replied with the confidence of youth and the cold calculation he had inherited from his father. Over the next several hours, they refined the plan until it became a precise sequence of actions and contingencies. Ivan would pilot their ship in a high-speed insertion to Kepler-7's surface, using sensor shadows and electronic countermeasures to avoid detection. Dmitri would handle infiltration and extraction, drawing on his expertise in close-quarters operations. Marcus would coordinate from orbit, using the surveillance gear they had installed to monitor Imperial communications and fleet movements. The plan was dangerous, probably suicidal, and absolutely necessary. Admiral Vextar had ordered the deaths of thousands of innocent people, and the Empire needed to learn that such actions had consequences. More than that, they needed to send a message that would echo across the galaxy. Humanity would not be exterminated quietly. As they made final preparations for the mission, Marcus found himself thinking about his mother. Elena had believed in justice, in the power of truth to change the galaxy for the better. She had died for those beliefs, killed by an empire that saw idealism as a threat to its authority. Tomorrow, her son would honor her memory in the language the empire understood best. Violence applied with surgical precision against those who thought themselves untouchable. Tomorrow, Baba Yaga would remind the galaxy that some debts could only be paid in blood. The ship's engines came online as they prepared to leave the asteroid field. Behind them, carefully concealed among the rocky debris, automated systems waited in silence for a signal that would turn the Corvus system into a trap worthy of legends. Marcus watched the stars wheel past the viewport and felt something he had not experienced since his mother's death: anticipation. The hunt was beginning, and this time the Empire would be the prey. The surface of Kepler-7 looked like a wound carved into the galaxy itself. Once a thriving mining world, it had been stripped bare by Imperial extraction operations and then abandoned when the mineral deposits ran dry. Now temporary structures rose from the scarred landscape like metallic tumors, housing the processing facilities where human colonists would be sorted and catalogued before their relocation to concentration camps. From his concealed position in the ruins of an old mining complex, Dmitri watched Imperial shuttles ferry prisoners from orbit to the surface. Through his enhanced scope, he could see the fear in their faces as they were herded into containment areas by armed guards. Men, women, children, entire families torn from their homes and brought here to serve as bait for a trap. The trap was impressive in its scope. The Imperial dreadnought Dominion hung in orbit like a dark star, surrounded by its escort fleet in a formation designed to respond instantly to any threat. Additional ships patrolled the system perimeter, and the surface bristled with defensive installations that had been deployed specifically for this operation. Admiral Vextar had turned Kepler-7 into a fortress, confident that Baba Yaga would walk into his carefully prepared killing ground. He was right, of course, but not in the way he expected. Target acquired, Dmitri whispered into his comm unit. Through his scope, he could see Admiral Vextar emerging from his command shuttle near the main processing facility. The Admiral wore ceremonial armor that gleamed in the harsh sunlight, his forearms gesturing imperiously as he surveyed his domain. Confirmed. Ivan's voice came back over the comm, beginning approach run. Marcus, status report? From orbit, Marcus monitored Imperial communications from their concealed ship. Fleet is maintaining standard formation. No indication they have detected our approach. Surface defenses are focused outward. They are not expecting infiltration from planetside. Ivan smiled grimly as he piloted their ship through the sensor shadows cast by Kepler-7's twin moons. The vessel's stealth systems were working perfectly, rendering them effectively invisible to Imperial detection arrays. But stealth was only half of their advantage. The other half was understanding their enemy well enough to predict his actions. Admiral Vextar was a creature of ego and protocol. He needed to personally oversee operations that reflected on his status within the Imperial hierarchy. He needed to be seen taking charge, demonstrating his competence to subordinates and rivals alike. That predictability would be his downfall. 15 minutes to surface insertion, Ivan reported. Dmitri, are you in position? Affirmative. I have a clear path to the target. Imperial security is focused on perimeter defense, not internal threats. They really do not expect us to be stupid enough to come here. We are not stupid, Marcus said from his orbital overwatch position. We are something much more dangerous. We are desperate people with nothing left to lose. The truth of that statement settled over all three of them like a shroud. Elena's death had changed everything. The quiet life Ivan had built, the peaceful retirement he and Dmitri had earned, the normal childhood Marcus should have had, all of it had been destroyed by Imperial arrogance. Now they had only each other and their shared hunger for justice. Ivan's ship broke through the upper atmosphere, its heat shields glowing as atmospheric friction tried to tear it apart. The vessel was designed for exactly this kind of insertion, fast, low profile, and equipped with enough electronic countermeasures to confuse any tracking systems that might detect its passage. On the surface, Dmitri began his approach to the processing facility. He moved through the industrial wreckage with the fluid grace of a man who had spent decades learning to be invisible. Imperial guards patrolled in predictable patterns, their attention focused on the prisoner containment areas rather than the abandoned structures surrounding the facility. Guards are changing shift in 3 minutes, Marcus reported, monitoring Imperial communication channels. That will give you a 90-second window when the facility's eastern approach is unmonitored. Dmitri acknowledged the information and adjusted his route accordingly. Ahead of him, the processing facility rose like a metallic mountain from the scarred landscape. Temporary but substantial, it housed the administrative apparatus needed to catalog and process thousands of prisoners. More importantly, it housed Admiral Vextar's mobile command center. Ivan's ship touched down in a blast crater 5 kilometers from the facility, its landing masked by the thermal signatures of still-cooling rock. The vessel systems immediately began preparing for emergency departure, while Ivan gathered the equipment he would need for the extraction. Phase 1 complete, Ivan announced. Beginning surface approach. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. While Imperial attention was focused on external threats, a single operative would infiltrate the facility and extract Admiral Vextar. The extraction would be swift and surgical, giving the Imperial fleet no time to respond. By the time they realized their commander was missing, Ivan and his captive would be safely away from Kepler-7. But the real brilliance of the plan lay in what would happen next. Imperial patrol approaching your position, Marcus warned Dmitri. 2 guards, standard patrol pattern. They will pass your hiding spot in 30 seconds. Dmitri pressed himself against the wreckage of an old mining crawler, his breathing controlled and silent. The guards passed within 3 meters of his position, their conversation clearly audible through his enhanced hearing. They were discussing the prisoners, making crude jokes about human fragility and speculating about the rewards they might receive for capturing Baba Yaga. When they were gone, Dmitri resumed his approach to the facility. The eastern entrance was exactly where Imperial architectural standards dictated it would be. A maintenance access point designed to be functional rather than secure. Dmitri's infiltration tools made short work of the electronic locks, and he slipped inside during the shift change window Marcus had identified. The facility's interior was a maze of temporary corridors and processing chambers. Dmitri moved through it like a shadow, avoiding security cameras with practiced ease. His destination was the command center in the facility's heart, where Admiral Vextar would be coordinating the prisoner processing operation. Target is in the central command chamber, Marcus reported. his surveillance systems having penetrated the facility's internal networks. 6 guards, standard Imperial protocol. Vextar is reviewing prisoner manifests at the main console. Dmitri reached the command center's outer security perimeter and paused to study the situation. 6 guards was more than he preferred to handle simultaneously, but not impossible. The key was speed and surprise. Eliminate the threats before they could raise an alarm or harm the target. He withdrew a small device from his equipment pack, a neural stunner modified for maximum effect against Imperial physiology. The weapon would render the guards unconscious without permanent damage, maintaining their operational principle of avoiding unnecessary casualties. Beginning infiltration, Dmitri whispered. The door to the command center slid open as if malfunctioning, drawing the attention of the nearest guard. As the alien moved to investigate, Dmitri struck from behind with surgical precision. The guard dropped silently, his nervous system overwhelmed by the neural stunner's electromagnetic pulse. 5 guards remaining. Dmitri moved deeper into the chamber, using the facility's equipment and furniture as cover. The stunner fired in rapid sequence, each shot calculated for maximum effect. Imperial guards trained to fight external threats found themselves unable to respond to an attack that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. 4 guards. 3, 2, 1. Admiral. Vextar turned from his console as the last of his bodyguards collapsed, his forearms reaching for weapons that Dmitri had already disabled with precisely aimed electromagnetic pulses. The Admiral's reptilian features twisted with rage and disbelief as he found himself facing a single human figure in maintenance coveralls. Impossible, Vextar hissed. The facility is secure. The perimeter is monitored. You cannot be here. And yet here I am, Dmitri replied calmly, keeping the neural stunner trained on the Admiral. You are coming with me, Admiral. Your fleet will not pursue us if they value your life. Vextar's laugh was like breaking glass. You think the Empire cares about one officer? Even an admiral is expendable if it means destroying Baba Yaga. My death would be a small price for your capture. Perhaps, Dmitri acknowledged, but you are not going to die today. You are going to live long enough to answer for what you did to Haven's Rest, to Marcus's mother, to all the innocent people you have murdered in the name of Imperial order. The Admiral's expression shifted as understanding dawned. The boy from the execution platform. You are here for revenge. We are here for justice, Dmitri corrected, though I admit the distinction may be academic from your perspective. He pressed the neural stunner against Vextar's neck, adjusting the setting to provide a mild shock rather than unconsciousness. The Admiral convulsed briefly, then stood rigid as the device's effects took hold. You will walk with me to the extraction point, Dmitri commanded. You will behave normally. Any attempt to alert your forces will result in your immediate death. Do you understand? Vextar nodded jerkily, his nervous system partially paralyzed by the stunners. By the stunner's effects, Dmitri activated a small transmitter that would make it appear as though the Admiral was still wearing his personal communication device, buying them precious time before anyone realized he was missing. Extraction in progress, Dmitri reported, moving to rendezvous point. They left the command center together, Dmitri guiding his captive through the facility's corridors with apparent casualness. To any observer, they looked like an admiral being escorted by a maintenance supervisor, a perfectly normal sight in Imperial installations. But as they reached the facility's exit, alarms began to wail throughout the complex. Someone had discovered the unconscious guards in the command center. The trap was beginning to close, and Ivan's ship was still 5 kilometers away across open ground that would soon be swarming with Imperial forces. Time to run, Dmitri muttered, abandoning stealth in favor of speed. The surface of Kepler-7 erupted into chaos as Imperial forces responded to the alarm. Searchlights swept across the industrial wasteland while aircraft lifted off from the processing facility in pursuit patterns. Admiral Vextar stumbled beside Dmitri, the neural stunner's effects making his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Imperial response teams are deploying, Marcus reported from orbit, his voice tight with concentration. 12 aircraft airborne and climbing, ground forces mobilizing from 3 different positions. They are throwing everything they have at this. Dmitri guided his captive through the wreckage of an old mining operation, using the twisted metal and abandoned equipment as cover from the searching aircraft. The Admiral's ceremonial armor caught starlight, making concealment difficult. But Dmitri had planned for this contingency. He produced a camouflage field generator from his equipment pack, a piece of technology that had cost him 6 months of careful negotiation with black market dealers. The device created a localized distortion field that would confuse most sensors, making them effectively invisible to aerial surveillance. Field generator active, Dmitri reported. Moving to extraction point Alpha. Ivan's ship was already lifting off from its concealment, its engines running silent to avoid detection. The vessel's stealth systems were good, but they would not hold up under close scrutiny from the Imperial fleet. They had perhaps 10 minutes before orbital sensors detected their presence. Unknown contacts detected in the asteroid field. An Imperial communications officer reported over the command frequency Marcus was monitoring. Configuration suggests weapons platforms. Possible trap scenario. Marcus smiled coldly as he listened to the Imperial fleet's growing confusion. The automated defense systems he had helped install in the Corvus asteroid field were finally revealing themselves. Their sensor signatures designed to suggest a much larger force than actually existed. The Empire was about to learn that Baba Yaga's planning had extended far beyond a simple extraction operation. Fleet is repositioning, Marcus reported. They think we have a battle group waiting in the asteroids. Admiral Kresh is ordering half the escort fleet to investigate. On the surface, Dmitri reached the extraction point, a clearing in the industrial debris where Ivan's ship could land long enough to retrieve them. But as they arrived, Imperial ground forces were already converging on their position. Atmospheric fighters screamed overhead, their sensors probing for any sign of the fugitives. Extraction point is compromised, Dmitri reported. Multiple Imperial units approaching from all directions. Recommend abort and move to secondary position. Negative, Ivan's voice came back hard and determined. We did not come this far to leave empty-handed. Prepare for hot extraction. Ivan's ship dropped from the sky like a falling star, its engines finally revealing their true power as he pushed them beyond safe operating limits. The vessel's weapon systems came online, targeting the closest Imperial units with precision that spoke of decades of combat experience. Energy beams lanced out from the ship's weapons, disabling vehicles and aircraft without killing their crews. Ivan maintained his operational principles even in the midst of extraction. Disable rather than destroy. Achieve objectives without unnecessary bloodshed. It was a luxury that few combatants could afford, but Baba Yaga had never been ordinary combatants. Boarding ramp deploying, Ivan announced as his ship touched down in the clearing. 30 seconds to extraction. Dmitri hauled Admiral Vextar toward the ship while energy bolts from Imperial weapons sizzled through the air around them. The Admiral's armor provided some protection, but more importantly, his presence served as a deterrent. Imperial forces were reluctant to use heavy weapons when their own commander was in the target area. They reached the ship's boarding ramp just as Imperial reinforcements arrived from a new direction. Heavy weapons platforms rolled into position, their operators calculating firing solutions that would avoid hitting their admiral while still engaging the enemy vessel. Extraction complete, Dmitri reported as the ramp sealed behind them. All aboard and secure. Ivan's ship lifted off with violent acceleration, its engines screaming as he pushed them to maximum output. Behind them, the surface of Kepler-7 fell away, revealing the full scope of the Imperial response. Hundreds of vehicles and aircraft were converging on their former position, while orbital sensors tracked their ascent with growing accuracy. Imperial fleet is moving to intercept, Marcus reported. Dreadnought Dominion is breaking from standard formation. They know we have Vextar. In the ship's cargo hold, Admiral Vextar was secured to a restraint chair while Dmitri monitored his condition. The neural stunner's effects were wearing off, and the Admiral's natural resilience was asserting itself. Soon he would be fully conscious and undoubtedly uncooperative. Where are you taking me? Vextar demanded, his voice regaining its natural arrogance despite his circumstances. To answer for your crimes, Ivan replied from the pilot station. Haven's Rest, the massacre of civilians, the execution of innocents. Your ledger is long, Admiral. I am a servant of Imperial order, Vextar shot back. Every action I have taken was legal under Imperial law. You are the criminals here. Terrorists who threaten galactic stability. Marcus turned from his sensor station to study the alien who had ordered his mother's death. Imperial law, he said quietly. Is that what you called it when you bombed civilian shelters? When you executed prisoners of war? When you tried to kill a 15-year-old boy on live broadcast? Vextar's expression shifted as he recognized Marcus from the interrupted execution. The human whelp. You should have died on Zerion Prime. Your continued existence is an affront to Imperial authority. My continued existence is proof that your authority has limits, Marcus replied. And today you are going to learn what those limits cost. Ivan's ship accelerated toward the edge of Kepler-7's gravity well, but Imperial vessels were closing fast. The dreadnought Dominion was moving to block their escape route, while smaller ships attempted to bracket them from multiple directions. It was a classic Imperial tactic: use overwhelming force to prevent enemy escape, then destroy them at leisure. But as the Imperial fleet moved into position, automated systems throughout the Corvus asteroid field began to activate. Weapons platforms that had been disguised as mining equipment powered up their targeting systems. Sensor drones that had appeared to be debris began broadcasting false fleet signatures. And in the heart of the asteroid field, something much larger than a weapons platform began to move. What is that? The captain of an Imperial destroyer demanded as his sensors detected the massive signature emerging from the asteroids. Unknown vessel, his sensor operator replied. Configuration suggests, wait, impossible. Sensor readings indicate a battleship-class vessel, but there are no ships of that type in this sector. Marcus smiled as he watched the Imperial fleet's confusion through their intercepted communications. The battleship was actually an automated decoy, a sophisticated holographic projection backed by just enough real metal to fool sensors. But the Imperial fleet did not know that, and their tactical doctrine demanded they treat any unknown capital ship as a serious threat. Imperial fleet is fragmenting, Marcus reported. Half are moving to engage the decoy, half are continuing pursuit. The deception is working. Ivan guided his ship through the chaos of Imperial formation changes, using their confusion to mask his true course. They were not heading for the obvious escape routes that Imperial commanders would expect. Instead, they were flying directly toward the dreadnought Dominion, using the massive ship's own bulk to hide their approach. Are you insane? Admiral Vextar demanded as he realized their trajectory. The Dominion's defensive systems will destroy us before we get within 1,000 kilometers. Perhaps, Ivan acknowledged, but they will not fire on a ship carrying their own admiral. And by the time they realize we are not planning to board their vessel, it will be too late. The ship streaked past the dreadnought's hull, close enough to trigger proximity alarms, but too fast for the defensive systems to engage effectively. Behind them, the Imperial fleet struggled to reorganize as the supposed battleship in the asteroid field revealed itself to be a hologram. But by then, Ivan's ship was already jumping to hyperspace, carrying Admiral Vexistar toward a destination where Imperial law held no authority, and justice would be measured by different standards. Haven's Rest hung in space like a wounded animal, its once green continent scarred by orbital bombardment and its cities reduced to smoking ruins. The Imperial fleet had been thorough in their destruction, leaving behind a world that served as a monument to the price of resistance. But among the debris and devastation, life endured. Ivan's ship descended through the atmosphere toward the settlement where Elena had lived and died, where Marcus had spent his childhood dreaming of distant stars. The landing site was a field that had once grown earth wheat under alien suns, now cratered and barren but still recognizable to those who had called this place home. As the ship touched down, figures emerged from concealed shelters scattered throughout the ruins, survivors of the Imperial massacre, humans who had hidden in caves and basements while their world burned around them. They approached the ship cautiously, weapons ready but hope flickering in their eyes. The boarding ramp lowered and Ivan stepped out first, his hands visible and empty. Behind him came Marcus, no longer the frightened boy who had been dragged away in chains, but a young man who carried himself with the deadly confidence he had inherited from his father. And between them, restrained and heavily guarded, came Admiral Vextar. Marcus? An elderly woman stepped forward from the group of survivors, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus Chen? Is it really you? Marcus recognized her immediately. Sarah Davidson, his mother's closest friend and a teacher at the settlement school. She looked older than her years, worn down by loss and hiding, but her eyes were bright with recognition and joy. Hello, Mrs. Davidson, Marcus said quietly. I brought someone to see you, someone who needs to understand what his orders accomplished. The crowd of survivors pressed closer as they recognized Admiral Vextar, their faces showing a mixture of rage and disbelief. Some reached for weapons. Others simply stared at the alien who had destroyed their lives. The tension was thick enough to cut, held in check only by respect for Marcus and uncertainty about what came next. "You are the one," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength as she looked at Vextar. "You gave the orders. You commanded the fleet that murdered our families." Admiral Vextar looked around at the assembled humans with undisguised contempt. "I followed Imperial protocol for dealing with rebellious populations. Your people chose to resist lawful authority. The consequences were inevitable." "Lawful authority," repeated another survivor, a man named David Martinez who had lost his wife and 2 children in the bombardment. "Is that what you call murdering children in their beds? Is that your idea of law?" "Imperial law recognizes no distinction between combatants and non-combatants when dealing with rebellion," Vextar replied coldly. "Your entire population was complicit in seditious activities. The bombardment was a measured response designed to prevent future resistance." The crowd stirred angrily at his words, but Ivan raised a hand for silence. "He will have his chance to speak," Ivan said, "and you will have your chance to judge. But first he needs to see what his measured response actually accomplished." They walked through the ruins of the settlement. Admiral Vextar escorted by Ivan and Dmitri while the survivors followed behind. The destruction was total and deliberate, not the random devastation of battle, but the systematic annihilation of a civilian population. Homes had been targeted individually, schools and hospitals had been prioritized for destruction, and even the cemetery had been bombed to deny the dead their rest. At each site, survivors told their stories. Sarah Davidson spoke of the children who had died in her classroom when the school was hit. David Martinez described finding his family buried under the rubble of their home. An elderly farmer named Chen Liu, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname, recounted watching his livestock burn while Imperial fighters strafed his fields. With each story, Admiral Vextar's expression grew more rigid and defensive. "Regrettable but necessary," he repeated like a mantra. "Imperial security required decisive action. The preservation of galactic order supersedes individual suffering." They reached the settlement's center, where Elena's journalism office had once stood. The building was gone now, reduced to a crater filled with twisted metal and ash. But among the debris someone had erected a memorial, a simple stone marker bearing the names of all who had died in the massacre. Marcus knelt beside the marker and traced his mother's name with one finger. "Elena Chen," he said quietly. "Age 38. Crime, believing that truth could change the galaxy. Sentenced death without trial." He stood and faced Admiral Vextar directly. "Do you remember her?" She was the journalist who exposed the corruption on Kepler 7. The woman whose work brought down 3 imperial governors and a dozen corporate executives. The woman whose only crime was believing that the Empire's own laws meant something. "I remember the terrorist sympathizer who incited rebellion through seditious propaganda," Vextar replied, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Show him," Ivan said to Dmitri. Dmitri activated a holographic projector that displayed the last message Elena had recorded before the Imperial assault. In the projection, she stood in her office surrounded by the tools of her trade, recording equipment, research files, and the small personal touches that made the space feel like home. "My name is Elena Chen," the projection said, her voice clear and strong despite the sound of approaching aircraft outside. "I am a journalist and a mother, and I am about to die for the crime of telling the truth. If anyone finds this recording, I want them to know that we resisted not out of hatred for the Empire, but out of love for justice. We died believing that words could change the galaxy, that truth could triumph over power. We died hoping that our children would inherit a better universe than the one we leave behind." The projection flickered and died as Elena's office was consumed by Imperial fire. In the silence that followed, Admiral Vextar stared at the memorial marker with something that might have been understanding beginning to dawn in his alien features. "She was not a terrorist," Sarah Davidson said into the silence. "None of us were. We were farmers and teachers, shopkeepers and mechanics. We grew food and raised children and tried to build something beautiful on this world. And you murdered us for daring to question why Imperial taxes consumed everything we earned." "Orders are orders," Vextar said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "Yes," Ivan agreed. "They are. And now you are going to receive new orders." He gestured to the assembled survivors who formed a rough circle around the memorial. "These people are going to decide your fate, Admiral. Not the Empire, not Imperial law, not your precious chain of command. The people whose families you murdered are going to judge whether you live or die. Vextar's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. You cannot do this. I am a prisoner of war. I have rights under Galactic Convention. Did the children in that school have rights? Marcus asked quietly. Did my mother have rights when your ships targeted her specifically for elimination? The survivors began to speak, each one recounting their losses and their judgment of the man responsible. Some called for death, others for imprisonment. Still others for forced labor rebuilding what he had destroyed. Their voices rose and fell like waves against a shore, carrying 16 years of grief and rage and the desperate hope for something that might pass for justice. When the last voice had spoken, Ivan turned to Admiral Vextar with something that might have been pity in his eyes. The sentence is life, he said simply. You will remain here on Haven's Rest, helping to rebuild what you destroyed. You will work with your hands to repair the damage your orders caused. You will live among the people you tried to exterminate, and perhaps you will learn what it means to be human. The Empire will never accept this, Vextar protested. They will send fleets to retrieve me. They will destroy this world completely rather than allow this precedent. Perhaps, Ivan acknowledged, but they will find Haven's Rest much more difficult to destroy a second time. And they will discover that Baba Yaga is no longer a name from the past, but a present reality that will hunt them across the galaxy if they try. As if summoned by his words, ships began descending from orbit, sleek vessels bearing the markings of independent colonies and free worlds throughout the sector. Word of Admiral Vextar's capture had spread through underground networks, and humanity's scattered communities had sent what aid they could spare. Marcus watched the ships land with a sense of wonder. His mother's death had been meant to serve as a warning to other humans about the price of resistance. Instead, it had become a rallying cry that brought together people who had never met but shared a common cause. What happens now? Sarah Davidson asked, looking at the growing encampment of ships and volunteers. Now we rebuild, Ivan replied. We make Haven's Rest into something the Empire cannot destroy. Not because it is hidden or defended, but because it represents an idea that will spread faster than their fleets can travel. Marcus knelt again beside his mother's memorial marker, placing a small flower, a forget-me-not from the earth seeds she had brought to this world. The truth did change the galaxy after all, he whispered. Just not the way you expected. In the distance, Admiral Vextar was being led away to begin his new life as a laborer in the world he had tried to destroy. The Empire would come looking for him. King for him eventually, but they would find a world transformed. Not by conquest or submission, but by the simple human conviction that some truths were worth dying for. And in the depths of space, automated systems began broadcasting a message to every world where humans lived under Imperial rule. A message that carried Elena Chen's final words to the galaxy, along with proof that resistance was not only possible but inevitable. The age of Baba Yaga had begun again, but this time it would not end with retirement and quiet lives. This time it would end only when every world was free, and every child could grow up believing that truth was stronger than power. The hunt would continue until justice was more than just a word, and the galaxy remembered that humanity would never again go quietly into the dark.